All right, we're recording. So this is episode 15 of our little podcast, or whatever you want to call it. We have a special guest today, John Morehouse, who graduated in 1967, which is awesome that we still have connections with alumni from 67. And, you know, we have guys from 68 that still talk, and Coach Bill Shortfager was great the other day. Coach Sabellis had the pleasure to speak with Mr. Morehouse before, so I would love to hear a little intro, Coach, on what you got.
All right, so thanks for coming on, John. I mean, this is a real pleasure. So John graduated in 67. He was second in the section. He was all-county in football. He played football for West Point as a freshman and then went on to Cornell. He was the mayor of Ardsley and sits as the town judge right now. So we welcome John Morehouse to the little podcast here. And I guess the first question we want to ask, I know Coach usually asks this question, but being that I have the conch, what is it, you know? How did you get into wrestling? How did you start wrestling?
That's interesting. When I was a freshman, Greeley had a very strong wrestling tradition right up to the point where I got in high school. But I had always played basketball in the winter, but while I was playing football that fall, my freshman year, I suffered a thigh injury near the end of the season, so that when it came time to try out for basketball, I physically was not able to participate. And, you know, I loved all sports, and you know, I didn't want to sit out a season, so I went out for the wrestling team. The head coach at that time was Mr. Snyder, Bill Snyder, who had been was one of the football coaches, so I knew him very well, and I enjoyed it right from the get-go. I mean, you know, particularly the physicality of the sport, and you know, the fact that it's more of an individualized sport than obviously football, and it was great. And Bill Snyder was a wonderful guy, but he didn't know anything about wrestling, so you know, we
sort of like Tatora. Just kidding, Coach.
So we really relied, the team, particularly when it came to the freshmen, relied heavily on the upperclassmen to do most of the teaching and coaching. And you know, Mr. Snyder's forte was working us out like dogs. So as I was telling Coach, we would start each practice by running about 2 miles right outside the gymnasium on that, you know, the oval that goes up and around the parking lot. So that's the way we always started off. And then we have a lot of just calisthenics and things before we began.
Now, you guys in 67 had the best finish that Horace Greeley has ever had. Second place in the
I didn't realize that, but we really had a strong team.
Do you remember who was on the team? I could list off some.
Well, you know, I before we got on, I looked for the team picture, which actually I think I brought over last winter at one of the matches. You had asked me to bring that over, and I'm just thinking now. I know there was Bill Spendelow. I can't remember the lightest lightweight, but then Spendelow. There was Rick Russo, who went to the States. It was Pat O'Connell in my class who went to the States. There was Peter, he was
Pete Lodge.
Peter Lodge, that's exactly who I was thinking.
So John, in that class.
And there was also, let me forget, well, there was Eric Brown as well. He was in my class.
Okay, I wouldn't have got that name, but Billy.
I can't remember who the heavyweight was because, unfortunately, we had some guys thrown off the team.
Weber, maybe?
Well, Weber was definitely on the team, but he was a super lightweight.
Oh, is that right? I don't know.
Yeah,
For some reason, I also. So on your team, the section tournament, Coach,
yes.
I don't even think that you know this. Rick Russo took second. Pat O'Connell took second. John Morehouse took second. Jeff Spendelow took first.
Right.
Jeff Spendelow ended up taking second in the state that year.
That's right. He was a great wrestler, yeah.
You know what I'm interested in, though, is like what you were saying, John, was that your coach, who I heard was a legendary coach, a great guy, cared a lot
Yeah, sure was.
cared about the kids greatly, but you said you didn't know much about wrestling. Where like club wrestling and things like that weren't around back then. So how did the older kids have such good skill to help you guys? Like how did they learn how to kind of, how they learn it? Like how did it work?
Yeah, that's a good point, and one that we were talking about earlier before we started. Yeah, in those days, there was no video.
Yeah.
And there were no summer camps. Although I did go to for 3 years, I went to Springfield College, which had a program, and it was great because it was one of the few wrestling programs, and it drew kids from all over the country. I mean, there were great wrestlers there. So, and some of the top coaches came, again, because there just weren't programs of that nature. We had no videos in those days. I mean, today you can go on and watch wrestling.
Wow. Anything. Yeah.
You're sick of it. But one thing I did, and we talked about this, there was a great wrestling coach at Yeshiva University. And he had been an Olympic gold medalist as well as a world champion. His son actually went to Cornell. He was prior to my time there. But later he moved to Chappaqua. And he lived for many years there and worked for the county. He was an attorney. But one of the wrestlers on the team, who was 2 years ahead of me, Walter Filkins, he somehow learned about this coach at Yeshiva. And in the winter, he had a program on Sundays that he taught for a small group of wrestlers. And Walter got me involved in that. So for 3 years, I would go down every Sunday morning to the city, to Yeshiva, and take lessons from this coach.
That's awesome.
It was, you learn from the team, from your teammates. And we had, as Coach just pointed out, we had some really great wrestlers. And to be honest, I think they just learned the same way I did from, the upperclassmen when they got on the team. And many of them, and I think of Tucker Stebbins as one example, who was probably the best wrestler on the team, but was in probably the most competitive class, at least in Westchester, and never got to go to the States. I mean,
he was 2 times runner-up.
Yeah, and his brothers had all been wrestlers, so I'm sure he got his ass thrown around at home all the time. But yeah, that's the way it is, and we had a great tradition in Chappaqua, and it was those guys who really kept the program going and brought in new people. As I say, when I got on the team, I didn't know anything. And these guys just took you under their wing, and I think they enjoyed throwing us around too.
An interesting fact, and I don't know if this is true, but you guys won the league title from 1962 through 66, but not 67.
Yeah, I can't remember. You brought that up. I don't know why. I don't remember what happened. I think Fox Lane won, but I could be wrong. Okay. I think, I actually, and you know better than I don't know whether I wrestled in that tournament, because at one point during the season, I got the flu and missed a number of matches.
It could have been something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you had a run, and even in 68, you guys won.
But, now that you say it, no, I did wrestle, because I remember the championship was at Ossining, and I remember I was just dead by the end of it because I just wasn't in my best condition, but somehow I eked out a victory.
So, Coach, what's interesting I just want to touch on too is that the Fox Lane Greeley rivalry, right? Like we were on a drought where we hadn't won a league title, I don't know, since the early 90s or something. And then like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we won the league title and we beat Fox Lane to win it. And like you're talking about in 67 that we're not sure if it was Fox Lane that beat you guys or whatever. It's very interesting that rivalry like lives on, that those are the two teams that are kind of duking it out.
I mean, Fox Lane, at least during all the years I lived in Chappaqua. They were our principal rival. Now,
Yeah, still.
at one point in football, Pleasantville was our top rival, but they opened up the school over in Armonk, Byram Hills, and so they cut the enrollment in half. And at that point, they dropped down in football to a smaller division, and we didn't play them any longer. But Fox Lane, in every sport, in fact, while I was on the football team, we never beat Fox Lane. We tied them twice, but they just they had a school, or it's actually a home for boys in Mount Kisco that brought in a lot of minority kids from the city, and they were some great athletes. I remember Bill Tyndall was one of the top basketball players in the country, and they had great wrestlers, great track guys, great football guys, we never beat them. I'll never forget it. I had like a 90-yard touchdown run in my senior year, and it was called back for a clip, and we lost by 1 point. So they should never forget.
Coach, do you remember? I don't know if I'm bringing up a sore subject, but do you remember who you wrestled in the section finals? And was it?
Yeah, absolutely. He was a good friend of mine.
Was it a battle?
Oh yeah, it was 3-2 was the final score. There was a guy named Frank Veteran, who was a great athlete. He was from Sleepy Hollow.
Okay.
There was the mayor of Terrytown, also the superintendent of schools for Elmsford. Later was the town superintendent for Greenberg. And Frank went to Harvard, and he was all county in football with me my senior year, first team. And I don't know how I lost to him, because I don't know, he just got it. What can I say?
So, that never goes away, does it?
I know. That's
him. Of all the guys that I didn't want to lose to, it was him.
Have you thought about that match a million times in your life?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Luckily, I've lost touch with him. So
what's funny is I don't know, Coach, if you've been following our team a little bit now, but we have Isabella, a girl on our team, who's done
definitely.
job. And
I go to a lot of your matches.
Yeah, she did great, Izzy. And
oh yeah,
we lost in the blood round of sectionals, and she was she beat that kid earlier in the season, and she could have made history. I still think she made history in other ways, but she was like, "Am I going to think about this for a long time?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, there's matches that I've lost that I'll never forget, but it makes you who you are. You get over it and you think about it. But I find it interesting that, 1967 section finals, you still think about it all the time. And that's just wrestling. That's just wrestling.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Because you don't forget it when it's one-on-one with somebody else. One thing when it's a team thing and you do well, the team loses, kind of, get around it that way, but not in wrestling.
So John, you seem like we talked to Bill Swartfager, and it's a certain type of person that is attracted to wrestling. And do you feel like it's the chicken and the egg, like wrestling helps shape your life, or you think that your personality is the way it is and you're driven and wrestling was just fit your mold?
It's a good question. I certainly think that sports in general, and certainly wrestling, had a major impact on who I am today. And certainly the teammates I had in high school had a major influence on who I am. I don't know, there's just nothing like wrestling in the sense that it's such an individualized sport, and you're out there alone. You don't want to make a fool of yourself. And the last thing you want to do is gas out in a match and, get pinned or, So yeah, you just, I just think from that standpoint, wrestling really had a tremendous influence on me. It still does today. I mean, I wrestled at Cornell, although I did it more from the standpoint of staying in shape for football, because we didn't have any off-season training programs in those days. While I was at West Point, I couldn't wrestle because if you were on a football team, you had winter practice, so you couldn't go out for another sport. But
At the time you were at West Point, they were pretty good.
Yeah, actually, my plebe year, my first year, we were ranked in the top 5 in the country, if not number 1. And our coach, Tom Cahill, was the coach of the year in college football. An interesting story there. I digress a little bit, but we were invited to the Sugar Bowl, and the Pentagon rejected the offer because in those days, at least for Army, for West Point, they had a policy of not letting you play in a bowl game if the country was in a war. And obviously we were fighting in Vietnam in those days. So they rejected it. And the day after they rejected it, we all marched in for breakfast into the mess hall. And, you know, there were a couple thousand kids, and there was a big sign that somebody had put up on the wall that said, "No Sugar Bowl for the Corps cadets, no Sugar Bowl for the cadets." And somebody, and it obviously had to be a group of people, had stolen every Sugar Bowl from every table. So that must have been close to 300 or 400 Sugar Bowls. And these were, and they were solid silver. So, I mean, you know, they had to back a truck up to that mess hall. And, you know, the Army, they didn't take that. That wasn't a joke with them.
No.
The place was crawling with whatever the equivalent of the FBI is for weeks, trying to figure out who stole these Sugar Bowls and where they were. They never found them. And then a year later, they just mysteriously showed up on the parade ground. So to this day, nobody knows who did it.
So during your time, the country was at war. JFK had just been assassinated a couple of years before that. So how was that growing up in that culture where the country was kind of divided a little bit, you know, about Vietnam, and you're an Army?
Yeah, actually, you know, that's funny. I would say that my class, the class of 67, was the last class that was completely unaffected. I don't mean personally, and I don't mean after we graduated, but up until that point of time, there was the country and certainly Chappaqua, I would say, was very strongly supportive of the government and what we were doing in Vietnam at that point in time. I do recall, and it's ironic because today is Memorial Day as we speak, or at least this is Memorial Day weekend. There was a small gathering of protesters at the memorial service. At that time, we would end the parade at the train station, and they would have flag raising or whatever. And there were a small group of protesters. But it wasn't until after I graduated that things really began to, where the anti-war movement began to strongly grow, including in Chappaqua. But it does raise. I think I told you this, Coach. I was heavily recruited by Army to go there, and but you still had to get an appointment. You know, they didn't have scholarships or anything. So the athletic department had a certain number of athletic appointments that it had. These were appointments that hadn't been filled through, congressional or senatorial or other means. And so they had those openings at their discretion. So I got a vice presidential. And one day during wrestling practice, Coach Snyder came out and he said, "Morehouse, Vice President Hubert Humphrey's on the phone. He wants to talk to you." So everybody, their ears poked up, and everybody went into the locker room and into the coach's office. And I spoke, and they could hear it with Vice President Humphrey, who of course didn't know me from Adam, but he was very nice and asked a few questions about who I was and what I was doing and everything. So, that was, and we were, at that point, and still, even during the war, people were respectful of politicians, certainly not as much as they're not today. But at that time, we were more respectful than we are today.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of, and it was right at the time of Vietnam, so I've never forgotten that.
Must have been a crazy time to be, going to West Point and all that stuff, like seeing how divided everybody was.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing, not that I was naive, but you never heard about drugs at all. I mean, just,
So drugs and alcohol back when you were in high
I
school.
don't think I have ever heard of marijuana.
Really? And that was coming up on 69,
Yeah.
Woodstock. And
Yeah, but that was the dividing line. Seriously, that was the dividing line.
yeah, my parents grew up at the same time, and I asked them, and they're like, no, I never did any of that stuff.
Yeah, no, I never heard about it.
I wasn't going to Woodstock. I was working. We were already married,
Yeah, I mean, I never puffed on a cigarette. I didn't have a beer occasionally.
But my favorite thing about the whole
my parents are dead now, so I can
put it out there.
put that out there.
Sorry,
The whole Bill Shortfigure interview when he talked about how he went to parties with a gallon of milk or whatever. I love that. I think that's so awesome. Like he.
What was that? I'm sorry. Where did he go?
Bill would go to parties, Coach Shortfigure, because he would want to hang out with his friends, but he was so driven with wrestling and football that he wouldn't take part in any of like the drinking or anything like that. So he would show up to the party with a gallon of milk and he would just drink his milk while he was.
Now, I mean, I believed that my body was a holy temple, but I didn't go that far. So.
He has never had a sip of alcohol in his life.
Wow. Well, more power to him.
So you know of Bill, Bill Swartfigure, right?
Yeah, actually, I don't know him well, but his family owned a retail store in Chapco. I think it was actually the
Really House.
And he lived. I lived up on Cross Ridge Road, and that one of the accesses from there was down to Roaring Brook, and his house was right across where the road came in. But I'm sure he knew some of my brothers. I had 3 other brothers and a sister who were all in high school at the same time that he. Yeah. And I think our paths crossed a couple times.
Yeah.
I certainly saw him wrestle in high school. He's a great wrestler.
Yeah.
Great coach.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a wonderful guy, and he's a great alumni. And
I kind of want to hear about the bond you guys had in '67, the whole team, because you guys came in second. You guys had a really good team, and you spoke about how the older kids helped out, but now '67, you're the older kid. Like, how did what was like the chemistry with the team? Was everybody on the same page? Or was everybody working really hard? Were people doing extra work to try to achieve their goals? Like, how was like the whole system in that time?
Well, one thing was interesting. My youngest brother, or not youngest brother, but my sibling that was next behind me in age was a freshman, and he was on the team. So that made it very interesting to have a brother on the team. I don't think anything changed. I mean, it was a tradition for the upperclassmen to be the leaders. And that was true in every sport that I participated in, but certainly more so in football, in wrestling than any other sport, because we only had, I don't recall having 2 coaches. I think it was just Coach Snyder. I could be wrong, but so if, just physically, it was impossible for Bill Snyder, even if he had been the greatest technician about wrestling in the world, you can't possibly. So we would break up into groups, and it wasn't by weight. And that's, you'd have people from every level and every grade, and you just taught yourself, and it worked great. Because I think it made much more of an impression on people, and they wanted to work harder because these were their peers. They didn't want to embarrass themselves in front of me or other upperclassmen. And I don't know what it's like today, but being an upperclassman had more significance maybe than it does today. I don't know, but yeah, that was the way we learned, was from each other. And I will say, though, I don't recall a lot of graduates coming back and trying to help out. I'm not sure I did that as well, but that might have been interesting. But I assume today the kids have all sorts of other things. I mean, I saw your new workout facility. That's unbelievable.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I spent my life in that thing. You wouldn't have seen me. I mean, that's another thing. I mean, we had very few, things that we could do outside of, just whatever the sport you were in. I mean, we had some great coaches, particularly in football. I mean, when I first came to high school, Sam Rutigliano was the head coach, and he was later he left in our junior year, and later was the head coach of the Cleveland Browns and was the NFL Coach of the Year.
Wow.
Well,
Was he a Chappaqua resident?
Yeah, I'm still in touch with him.
Did he go to Horace Greeley?
No, no.
Oh, okay, so he moved to Chappaqua.
Actually, he grew up in Brooklyn and went to high school there. And one of his assistant coaches was a guy named Larry Pasquale, who is still a very close friend of mine.
Irish guy?
Yeah. That was the first team he ever coached was Horace Greeley. And he later went on to a great career in the NFL. I still talk to Larry all the time. I tried to recruit him to be the head coach at Cornell, but he was just retiring from the NFL, where he had been a coach for many years, and didn't want to step into another coaching job.
So, are you still active at Cornell?
Oh, I'm very active. Yeah, I'm. As one of the founders of the Cornell Football Association, we have about 1,000 members, and we do lots of things for the team, fundraising. We help out with jobs and things like that. Involved with wrestling. I mean, Rob Cole, who's the wrestling coach, is an amazing guy. He's been in touch with me during this whole situation. I mean, I did get the virus, and he called me every day to make sure I was getting.
Oh, I did too.
I didn't know that though. But
yeah,
I know you did, Coach DeBellis, but I didn't know John got it too.
Yeah,
a
lot of people.
All of the I mean, that's the great thing about sports. I mean, you never lose your relationship with your coach. Never. I mean, I still talk, and I feel terrible because I lost touch with at the end of his life with Coach Perrell, who was
Nick Perrell, yeah, legend
football coach, and he was like a second father to me.
Yeah, we have to do a better job honoring our alumni. Not to say that they're not doing a great job, but we had the room with had all of our guys listed, and we did alumni nights. But we've had some great people come through Horace Greeley.
I would like to have a big alumni night this year if we can make it happen. Because
now that would be wonderful.
We should do something big.
I know. Jay. Last fall, I was invited to an event at the Peekskill football game because they were honoring my brother's class. Tommy Mullane was on that team. They were undefeated. I think they had an amazing team, and my brother had been on the team, and my brother died in 1972, so they invited me to come back to celebrate that because he had been on the team. And there's nothing like that, to get together with your teammates. I mean, cool. I'm still incredibly close with all the guys I played football with. I mean, during this whole pandemic, we've had just an ongoing, texting thing going on.
Yep.
And, I don't know who I'd be today if it wasn't for those guys.
Yeah. So John, you do a lot of work outside of your job. I think you're a financial advisor.
Yeah.
And but you do a lot of charity work where you were the mayor of Ardsley for a long time. You're the judge now. You're on the board at Cornell. Anytime I call you, you're always willing to come help out Horace Greeley Wrestling. So what drives you to give?
I'm lonely. I'm kidding. No, I mean, my father, God rest his soul, he believed so strongly in community service. And he instilled that, at least in me. And so, plus I love helping people. I love being around people. And so, when I got out of a law school and got married and moved to Westchester, we lived in Ardsley. I now live in Ossining, actually. We sold our house recently, moved into a condo community. I just, I got into, and once people find out that you're willing to help out, believe me, you get lots of calls and requests. And so I just, I find it hard turning people down, but I love it. I love helping out a community, whatever the organization is. I was president of Westchester Legal Services for a number of years, and they work with the poor and the indigent, and I've been very involved with all sorts of activities at Cornell over the years. And as you said, I've been very involved in politics, and there's nothing more fulfilling than being able to help the residents of your community out. And although as a judge, I'm not sure they feel that way anymore.
I always say that, if you give two, you always get one. So if you give enough twos, you got a beautiful life. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And it's helped me out. And, I'm not ashamed to say it's helped out in business. You meet lots of people, you can net. And so, whatever it is, working outside of your own profession and family and community I think it's a tremendously worthwhile thing. I think it's one of the reasons that our country is what it is. Not, I wouldn't say necessarily today, but historically, because we're all in this together, and we want to help each other out. And at the end of the day, it makes for a stronger society and family and community. So, I'm all for that. And I think you and I were talking. I'm even the president of the Fair Ridge Cemetery in Chappaqua.
Yep.
So my roots go deep
true.
The ground.
Yeah.
So is anybody out there listening that hasn't gotten a plot yet, a burial plot?
Maybe I should go buy one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful little spot. In fact, it's I digress.
Hey, what are you gonna do? Wait till the end?
When I go over there to my parents' grave.
Oh, sorry, Joe.
Like old home week, because you walk around over there, and it's like you may not know the person that's buried, but you know their family.
Right.
Yeah. It's a real community cemetery. I mean, it's amazing. It's just amazing.
A funny story.
I was telling you that during this pandemic, and we're all stuck at home. I have some friends that's I went to high school with that still live in Chappaqua. I get together with them once a week, and we pick out a different area of the town, and we walk for 2 or 3 hours.
Awesome.
It makes you feel good.
Come up to Cabin Ridge.
Thing we were all talking about is being part of a family, whatever it is, and you immerse yourself in it. Just makes you feel good. Being around things, memories and people and houses. I mean, we've been walking around and we'll say, Jesus, I remember who lived in that house. And that starts a whole conversation about what you were doing at that point in your life. And by the way, if the person who's in my family's home is listening, please paint the house. Would you?
Hey, that's my house.
I love hearing that, though, because I don't know if you've been watching these, John, but we did Greg Ironfrank a couple of days ago, who graduated in 06, and he was my teammate in 05, and we were section champs together. We were, big into wrestling, and it was still really cool to talk about our time together. And now, since that interview, we always talk, but we've been texting a lot more. We've been communicating a lot more, and I love hearing that. From the class of 67, 68, you guys still communicate. It's that bond is great. And that's why I think we should try to push that alumni match even bigger, because me and Coach Sabellis now have like about 10 years of alumni now. So all of those young alumni should be there, and then we should get the guys from the older classes there, and it could be great.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we've talked about that. We've kind of tried to do some things, and I know Pete Zimmerman's been really helpful, and
Pete's great.
Peter Lodge came, but again, you got to work at it. Once it gets going,
They'll keep going.
Then it really, and I'd be happy. But it's interesting I got an advertisement in the mail from a company. They do garage doors and other things like
Henry Allen,
and
Gary.
That's right. And his sister was a good friend of mine. Well, not sister, but Henry's daughter was a good friend of mine in high school.
Oh wow!
I mean, the world just the connections are amazing.
That is cool. You know what I'm curious about, Coach, that I didn't ask before? He wasn't a big name guy. He's not a big name guy yet at Cornell, but my cousin wrestles for Cornell. He started for them at 157 this year.
Who's that? Let me think. Did he go to Iona?
Yes.
Fordham
Prep. Yeah. Santora.
That's my cousin.
Oh, that's interesting.
But
he had a good, I have to take my hat off. Because he didn't have a big rep coming in, but he wrestled real well.
He's got one more year, so we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, he really because they had a difficult road to this year because they had all these guys sit out for their Olympic year. Many of them
superstars,
primarily because what Coach Cole was trying to do is set things up for the next 2 years.
They're going to be good.
If they're ever going to win the national championship,
no,
next 2 years
they're going to be good.
Could you imagine, though, that Cornell is so special because they don't scholarship their athletes, and they're a New York team. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, the ones they've had in the last 10 years.
Oh, Rob Cole is a genius.
They get guys.
And he's a wonderful guy. He's
a great guy.
I got him into bicycling because I go up to Cornell and the Finger Lakes a couple times a summer, and I ride around the lakes. And it's like over 100 miles, some of the lakes, but it is the most incredible. So I've gotten him into bicycling now, but he is unbelievable. And, he figured out that because the Ivy League is so inflexible on what you can do. Mm-hmm. Once you graduate, you can't come back again even if you haven't graduated. And but he figured out, and everybody that's recruited, they do a PG year. I think they must take, because Cornell will let you come. I think they give you 1 year to matriculate after you've been accepted. So you defer. Ithaca, and he's got a house. I don't know how he does this.
Adam did it. My cousin did it.
Yeah, somebody bought a house.
They go to Finger Lakes Community College, I think.
Yeah, well, they live in this house.
That's Mr. Rebuto, I think, bought this house.
Oh, is that right? They go to Westchester or to Compiz County Community College. They take some of the tougher courses so that they don't have to do them at Cornell. They are members of the it's a Finger Lakes Wrestling Club, which is an Olympic training center.
Yeah, smart guy, man. Jesus.
These unbelievable coaches there. Plus, they can use all the Cornell facilities. They can't wrestle with the team, but they can use the coaches and the facilities. And then they go on the weekends. They go off to all these unaffiliated matches, and then they start out, with 1 year under their belt, basically, of college wrestling.
Brilliant. It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, none of the other Ivy League schools either have caught on. I mean, they all know.
Princeton's trying, I think. They're trying to catch up. They're trying to do something similar.
Yeah, they are. I mean, and they've – unfortunately, they beat Cornell this year.
Yeah, they're trying. They're a good team.
I don't consider it a loss.
If they had their guy.
I was at the match, and we should have beaten them. We should.
Adam almost beat Quincy Monday, who was ranked second.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I was shocked. Quincy Muncie is not a good
awesome.
You know what's interesting, John? I don't know if you knew this about Adam, but Coach Abels will tell you he was very close to being a Greeley wrestler. Because
is that right?
He grew up in Valhalla, and he's my cousin. And at the time, I just graduated Hofstra, and I just came back and started coaching with Coach DeBellis. And I kind of got Adam into wrestling, right? So we're getting him wrestling. Valhalla didn't have a modified program. So we were able to, it was allowed, Kuzma allowed us, somehow we were able to make it work that Adam was allowed to wrestle for the Greeley middle school program because there was no other program for him. So he was in it. And his father, who's a big wrestling guy, enjoys wrestling, was going to buy property in Chappaqua, and he was going to move to Chappaqua and wrestle at Greeley. And then last second, his mother wanted him to go to Fordham Prep for some reason, and then he went to Fordham Prep.
Oh, interesting.
It was very close. Very close.
Yeah.
Wrestler. So, small world.
We're going to need to wrap this up.
Okay, this is fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Great. It was great hearing these stories.
Well, let's really follow up on this alumni thing and see what
we'll figure something out. I think that a match is great, but it doesn't really give us enough time to congregate.
Well, do you know what we could do? Tell me if you guys agree with this. So at the club I coach at, we do alumni night or day during winter break where all the past wrestlers just come to a practice. But we could fill up a room. We could have all these guys on the side hanging out, talking, telling stories, and we could have a little practice too, where it's not crazy because we don't have the biggest room.
Yeah. No. Do you have Coach? Do you have access to like an alumni list?
I went down years ago. Had to be 8 to 9 years ago. I went down to the Chappaqua Library, and there's a book with alumni. It's an alumni directory. And I copied all of the emails, and that's where I got my email distribution list.
Yeah, I actually still have those books. They haven't done it in years, unfortunately, so it's not.
And it's so much easier now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm not very good on doing that kind of research on the internet, but I'm sure somebody who knows what they're doing, you get a lot of that information pretty quickly.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. And then, we got to find a key person in each class.
Right.
Still has contact with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that would be great. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I know
Listen, just that one question. I didn't realize you went to Hofstra. Did you wrestle against Cornell during one of the seasons?
Yeah. I lost to, so funny story. I told DeBellis this story before, but when I got to Hofstra, I was a 57 pounder. My sophomore year, I lost the wrestle off to a kid who made the round of 12 at NCAA's 4-3. And I couldn't keep the weight. It was a hard cut for me. And Hofstra was good at the time. We're kind of not so good anymore, but they're coming back a little bit. But at the time, we were pretty good, so I couldn't beat the 65 or 74. So I bumped all the way up to 84, but I was weighing like 180 pounds. I wasn't that big. But I was starting. And then for Cornell, both years, I got bumped up to 197. So I wrestled Cam Simez twice.
Oh, my God.
Oh, my goodness.
Cam Simez, NCAA champ for them. And when we wrestled,
and he was an animal. He just ground you into the mat.
Funny story. So we wrestled. The second time he beat me worse. The first time I was small. You could tell I was way smaller than him. So he was probably licking his chops like, all right, here we go. Bonus points, right? And my job at the time, because Hofstra was pretty good. It was a good dual meet. It wasn't a dominant dual
was your coach the Ohio State coach at that?
My first year only. My first year. But Cam Simez beat me 11-5. And
that's not bad.
He was so mad that he didn't get bonus points. He took his headgear off and threw it and lost the team point. So they only got 2 points when he beat me. And that was like my claim to fame. He was so upset that he didn't major me. He threw his headgear.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish Cornell would wrestle them more often because, I would always go down to Hofstra when we wrestled down there.
Yeah, Hofstra, they were good. Cornell beat us.
Oh, they were real good then.
There were some teams.
It was a challenging match.
Yeah, there were some teams. It was good.
Yeah.
I wrestled the Cornell kid at the New York State Wrestling Championships in '96, I think. It was at West Point.
Oh, really? Who was that? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I wrestled them in the semifinals. And
you know what you should look for? I saw, Dika Millis, or what's his name? Yanni Dika.
Yeah.
Oh, he's a beast.
There is a tape of him when he won the championship his freshman year.
Oh, yeah.
And they slowed it down to very, very slow. It is a textbook case of, he's a genius when it comes to wrestling. But when you watch him in slow motion, it's not humanly possible what he does.
Oh, he's unbelievable. He might be one of my favorite wrestlers to watch now as a coach because he's unbelievable.
His intuition is unbelievable.
He is, and now his brother's going to be a freshman.
Great, and he's
Greg?
great too. But Yanni's I'm sure you know John better than us, but he is a good kid. Like he did a webinar for the club recently because of the virus. We can't have practice, and he did it free of charge and came on there and he spoke so elegantly and he was so answered all the kids' questions and he was just a good guy. Like I really like.
No, he is a really good guy, really down to earth. You know, Dake is the same way, but he's a little flick.
Yeah, it's a little different, I think. You know better than us, but just off interviews, Yanni comes across to me as like.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't have a egotistical bone in his body.
That's awesome. It's
Crazy.
You know, and some of those guys, when they're that good, get
a
little inflated sense of ego. I mean, I do you think he has a chance to go to the Olympics?
Sure.
You think so? Really?
I mean, I think it's a 3-horse race because I love wrestling, so I follow this stuff. Like,
yeah.
So it's between him, Zane Rutherford, and probably Jordan Oliver, but he has wins over both of them.
Yeah,
but
I know.
For him too, so it's going to be a dogfight, but he very well could do it. Very well.
He knows how to win. He knows how to win.
He's starting to get a little strength now. I mean, he's all experience and just natural talent. And I mean, if you get some weight on, not necessarily weight, but some muscle, whew,
He's unreal.
it would change him. I don't know.
Coach, we're going to have to get going.
Okay,
John,
great. Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
No, it was great. It was great.
There was a lot
Great,
of fun.
and have a happy Memorial Day weekend to everybody.
Yep.